Montana Territory, August 1876. The girl in the crate was not supposed to breathe. Marshal Jedediah Cook had ordered her packed up like freight, sealed in a wooden box with straw and sawdust, and shipped east on the Great Northern Rail line. Her name was Naomi Dillard, and she had stared up at the slats above her, wrists bound, mouth gagged, heart pounding. She remembered the marshal's words as he nailed the lid shut. She was meant to be mailed away. But fate did not keep still. Nor did the man who found her. It was hot on the trail when he heard the sound. A soft scraping, like something alive shifting in dry wood. Morgan James had paused beside the stalled freight wagon, the horse spooked and breathing hard. The box was shoved against the back, marked for delivery to St. Paul. Then the sound came again. Morgan's brow furrowed. He stepped up and knocked his knuckles against the crate. A muffled thump. He yanked his knife free, wedged it under the lid, and hauled it back. Straw spilled out. And there she was. Her dress was torn, her lips cracked, but her eyes burned with something that kicked him in the chest. Not fear. Not gratitude. Defiance. He pulled away the rest of the boards and cut the rope from her wrists. She sat up slowly, coughing hard, then ripped the gag from her mouth. "Where's Cook?" she rasped. Morgan blinked. "Excuse me? Marshal Jedediah Cook. Where is he?" "Dead," Morgan said plainly. "Raid last winter. Sioux took his outpost." He looked her over, then offered his canteen. "You all right?" Naomi drank hard. Then she looked at him, her voice rasped but steady. "I was not supposed to survive that trip." Morgan sat back on his heels, lips pressing into a line. "Seems that way." They were camped by dusk. The freight wagon abandoned, the crate burned. Morgan had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders while she ate beans over the fire. She did not speak for a while, just stared into the flames like they held answers. He watched her carefully. She was young, maybe 22, but her eyes carried years. Her hands shook when she thought he was not looking. "You were meant to be mailed away," he said low. She looked up, startled. He nodded. "I know what it means. I have seen men treat women like property. But you," he paused, voice roughening, "you belong somewhere, you are free." She stared at him, and something shifted in her face. As if the heat in her chest had finally met something it could soften against. Naomi did not sleep much that night. Morgan heard her footsteps pacing, quiet and careful, the way someone moves when they have learned to be hunted. But come morning, she was there still, sitting close to the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup he had filled for her. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He shrugged, chewing on a dried peach. "Because someone should have. That's not much of a reason." "It is enough." She studied him. His face was rough, tan deep from sun, eyes a steady blue, beard trimmed just enough to be clean. There was something careful in the way he moved, like someone used to bad things happening fast, and ready to meet them. "I need to get to Fort Benton," she said. "I have family there." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "That's so? My uncle runs a newspaper. Only one who ever believed me when I told him what Cook was doing." "And what was he doing?" "Taking girls off the reservations. Orphaned, mostly. Or ones with no records. He sold them east, told folks they were criminals." "No one asked questions?" Morgan's jaw worked. "You Apache?" "Half. My mother was Chiricahua. My father was a railroad man. Died in a cave-in when I was 5. He nodded like that explained everything. "All right then. I will take you to Benton." Naomi blinked. "Why?" "Because someone should," he repeated. They rode together, her on his spare horse, a long-legged roan with a white blaze. Days stretched into dusty heat and cool nights. She began to speak more about her mother singing in Chiricahua, about how Cook had taken her from a mission school when she was 16, about the girls who never came back. Morgan told her about the ranch he had lost in Texas after his wife died, about the winters he spent trapping in the Bitterroots, about the fight that nearly got him hanged in Cheyenne. "You do not talk like a man who wants company," she said one night. "I do not. But I do not mind yours." She looked at him then, softer than before. "I would not have made it without you." Morgan leaned forward, voice low. "You should not have had to." The trail was not easy. Twice they were stopped, once by drunk cavalrymen, once by a bounty hunter looking for a half-breed girl escaped from custody. Morgan took a rifle butt to the jaw in that second scrape, but Naomi shot the man's horse from under him, and they got away without blood. That night, while she cleaned his cut, he caught her hand. "You are not just surviving anymore," he said. She looked down at their hands. "I do not know what comes next." He tipped his head. "Maybe something better." She stared at him, her fingers curled around his. Then, slowly, she leaned in. Not fast. Not desperate. Just sure. The kiss was quiet. Warm. Like something earned. He kissed her back. They made it to Fort Benton on a bright morning, the Missouri River glittering behind the town. Her uncle was there, older than she remembered but crying when he saw her. Morgan stood back while they embraced, his heart caught somewhere between pride and loss. But she did not let go of his hand. Later, when the sky was gold and the town hushed, Naomi found him by the riverbank. "My uncle offered me a place here," she said. He nodded. "I told him I am not staying." He turned toward her, surprised. "I want land," she said. "A place that is mine. A place where I can build something. I do not want to hide anymore." He looked at her, heart thudding. "I want to be with someone who sees me," she said quietly. "Who does not flinch when I say what I am." Morgan stepped forward, slower now. "You are already free, Naomi." She smiled. "Then come with me." He laughed once, soft and disbelieving. "You sure?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he touched her face, kissed her again, longer, deeper this time, and felt something settle inside him. They rode south 2 days later. No more crates. No more running. Just 2 horses, one shared fire, and a future they would build together. They settled near the Judith River, west of Lewistown, where the grass bent in long waves and the pines held close to the hills. Morgan had once wintered cattle nearby, and the land still called to him, quiet, wide, unclaimed. Naomi stood beside him that first afternoon, boots planted firm, hands on her hips, and nodded once. "This'll do." They spent the first week in a canvas tent, rising with the dew and sleeping when the fire burned low. Morgan built a lean-to from pine poles and stripped bark, and she gathered chokecherry branches to hang inside for scent. The land was dry but not parched, and a spring ran shallow along the edge of the rise. They dug a trench for drainage, hauled water in buckets, and took turns watching for cougars. Naomi didn't speak much while they worked, but when she did, it came with weight. "You ever think you'd settle again?" she asked one evening, dragging a log closer to the fire. "Didn't figure on it," Morgan said, brushing dirt from his hands. "But you wanted to?" He stared into the flames. "Didn't let myself want anything for a long while." She nodded, not pushing. She never pushed. The next morning, she took one of the horses and rode east toward the ridge, returning hours later with a roll of canvas, 2 hanks of cord, and a clay jar wrapped in hide. "Traders passing through," she said, handing him the canvas. "I told them we need more come fall." He raised an eyebrow. "You making plans?" She shrugged. "I've got a winter to survive." "I'm not doing it cold." He watched her walk past him, the jar tucked under her arm. She was already thinking ahead, and he liked the way her mind moved, practical, sharp, unafraid of the long road. By the second week, they'd cleared a patch wide enough to lay logs. Morgan notched the ends with care, his blade sharp and steady. Naomi hauled stones from the riverbed, stacking them for the hearth. When a storm rolled over from the west, they worked through it, hair soaked, limbs aching, but neither complaining. That night, inside the lean-to, he found her sitting cross-legged, sewing a tear in her skirt by lantern light. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. "Where'd you learn to stitch like that?" he asked, easing down beside her. "Sister Mildred at the mission," she said, not looking up. "Said if I had nothing else to offer, I'd be useful with a needle." Morgan studied her face, the way her mouth pressed tight at the memory. "She wrong?" he asked. Naomi stopped sewing. "No. But she didn't see past that." He reached out, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I do." She held his gaze, then leaned into his palm, letting her eyes close for a moment. That night, they lay beneath the canvas, his arm curled around her waist, her breath warm against his chest. Neither said anything about it. They didn't need to. A month passed, then two. The cabin rose, slow and stubborn, but solid. Naomi built shelves from scrap lumber, lined them with dried roots, and pressed bundles of herbs between pages of discarded newspapers. She carved her name into the beam above the doorway in small, careful letters. One morning, she woke early and found Morgan outside, holding a letter with a wax seal. He didn't speak at first, just handed it to her. Her uncle's handwriting curved across the front. She unfolded it slowly. When she finished, her shoulders dropped, and she passed the page back. "He's had girls come forward," she said. "Told their stories. Says the paper's printing them in a series. He named Cook." Morgan folded the letter without a word. "You all right?" she asked. "Just thinking how long it takes for truth to catch up to a man's deeds." She stepped closer. "It caught him in the end." He nodded. "You helped to do that." She didn't smile. But she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. They built a corral that week, fencing in a pair of calves they'd traded for with dried meat and a spare saddle. Morgan showed her how to mend the gate latch, and she showed him how to strip willow bark for cordage. They worked in rhythm, not always speaking, but always knowing where the other stood. One evening, while he was oiling his rifle, she set a bundle on the table beside him. "What's this?" he asked. "Shirt I made you. You keep wearing that one until it's more whole than cloth." He unfolded it, a plain, sturdy thing, stitched from canvas dyed with walnut husks. He ran a hand over the seams. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know." He rose slowly, met her eyes. "You keep doing things like this, Naomi, and I'm liable to think you mean to stay." "I already did." He stepped forward, cupped her jaw, and kissed her with quiet certainty. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Next spring," she whispered, "I want a garden. Squash. Maybe corn, if the ground's soft enough. I'll break the soil for you," he said. "You'll plant it with me." They stood like that until the fire burned low, the wind folding gently through the trees outside, two people who had once been alone, now tethered by something deeper than rescue. In the morning they'd start again. Add another beam. Stretch another fence. Make another plan. But for now, they stayed close, knowing the worst of the road was behind them, and what lay ahead was theirs, together. By late November, the ground began to freeze before dawn. The cabin stood strong now, its cedar roof sealed tight with pine pitch, smoke curling steady from the flue Morgan had chiseled stone by stone. Naomi hung a woven rabbit pelt over the doorframe to keep out the draft. Snow hadn't come yet, but it was close. The air carried that quiet warning. They had no neighbors within 2 days' ride. Just the land, the river, and the sky that stretched so wide it made the both of them quieter. One afternoon, Naomi returned from the ridge with a handful of dried prairie rosehips and a stranger's tracks behind her. "2 riders," she said, brushing snow from her shoulders. "Passed west of the fence line. Didn't turn in." Morgan stood from splitting kindling. "Boot or moccasin?" "Horseshoes." She paused. "They were watching." He didn't answer right away. Just picked up the rifle from the porch rail and checked the chamber. That night Naomi slept with her coat near the door. Morgan stayed up, boots on, fire low, listening. Nothing came. The following morning, they set out together eastward, following the tracks. They cut through the trees and over a dry creek, Naomi leading, her rifle across her saddle. They found the remains of a camp ashes, a broken tin plate, and horse droppings still warm. Morgan crouched near the fire pit. Didn't stay long. Naomi pointed toward a trail leading up the bluff. They didn't leave empty-handed. Look there. A tuft of gray fur caught on a bramble. One of their calves. Morgan stood, jaws set. They'll try again. Naomi didn't flinch. Then we'll be ready. That evening, she laid the rosehips in the hearth's heat to dry. Morgan worked a new latch for the barn. Neither spoke of the riders again, but that night, Naomi pulled their bedroll closer to the door. She looked up at him in the dark. You ever been hunted before? He turned toward her. Once. In Sonora. Didn't end well for them. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder. I don't want to run again. You won't. It snowed the next day, just a dusting, but enough to muffle sound. Naomi walked the fence line alone, scarf pulled tight, checking for breaks. She found none, but her eyes kept drifting to the tree line. When she returned, Morgan was oiling a trap. She nodded toward it. You planning to take one alive? He looked up. No. Just don't want them crawling too close. Later, she sat near the fire, sharpening a skinning knife. He watched her hands move, fast and sure. You never told me what you wanted before Cook took you. She paused. Didn't have time to want anything. He waited. I like to draw, she said finally. Didn't matter what. Faces. Trees. I used to carve charcoal from the stove and sketch on the backs of church bulletins. He leaned forward. You still could. I might. She looked down at her lap, voice quieter. I remember one girl, Anna. She was 7. She tried to hide a pencil in her boot. Cook took it, told her she could earn it back. I never saw her again. Morgan didn't speak. He just reached across the table, took her hand, and held it without needing to say anything. The riders came back 3 nights later. The corral gate clanged open, and the horses brayed loud enough to wake the dead. Morgan was outside before he had his boots on, rifle drawn. Naomi was already circling from the back, knife in hand, her breath rising in white clouds. They didn't fire. Just shouted a warning, a name neither of them recognized. But Morgan saw the one on the left, eyes too steady, coat too clean. Not a rancher. Not a drifter. Naomi raised her rifle, voice sharp. Drop the reins and go. The man hesitated. Morgan stepped beside her. You heard her. The riders turned, spooked, and rode off. Not fast. Not fleeing. Just gone. The next morning, Naomi found a mark carved into the corral post, 2 arrows crossing a crescent moon. She held it out to Morgan. Bounty sign, he said. Means they'll be back. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Inside, Naomi opened the cedar chest and pulled out a folded map. She spread it across the table and pointed south. There's a homestead near the Judith Basin. Blacktail Creek runs through it. I saw it once, when I was younger. If we had to move, it's the only place I'd go. Morgan studied the line of trees drawn in charcoal, the slope of the hills sketched loosely beside it. You drew this? She nodded. He traced one of the hills with his finger. It's good. She looked at him, her voice low. I don't want to leave this place. We won't. Not unless we have to. I'm tired of being moved like a pawn. He folded the map carefully. You're not a pawn. Her eyes met his. Then stay beside me when they come. I will. They talked little the rest of the day. Naomi cleaned the rifle again. Morgan packed the salt meat higher on the shelf. The wind picked up around dusk, and the snow came heavier, filling the spaces between the logs with cold breath. That night, he pulled her close beneath the quilt. You said something once, she murmured. That I belong somewhere I'm free. He kissed the crown of her head. I meant it. She pressed her face to his chest. Then this is where I'll stay. By the time the snow reached the lower hills, the river had slowed beneath a skin of ice, and Naomi started sleeping with her boots near the hearth. The threat of the riders hadn't faded, but neither of them spoke their names anymore. There were no more signs, not in the woods, not near the pasture, but both kept their rifles within reach. Inside the cabin, the pine walls held warmth better now. Naomi had lined the chinks with old wool and bundled straw between the rafters. Morgan laid fresh traps near the bend, and each morning, Naomi checked them before coffee boiled. They skinned what they caught together: muskrat, a fox once, lean things, but they wasted nothing. One morning, while she gutted a hare, she looked up at him across the table. "You ever think about what you'd be if you hadn't lost the ranch?" He didn't answer right away. She waited, hands still. "I'd have grown old the wrong way." His voice was low. "Built fences around things that didn't matter. Tried to hold too much alone." She wiped her knife clean. "You don't hold anything alone now." He met her eyes. "No. I don't." Later that day, they rode north to gather firewood from a grove where lightning had felled 2 good-sized spruces. Naomi walked the line of the trunk, running her glove along the bark. "You ever seen a tree split from the inside?" she asked. Morgan shook his head. "Happens when it grows too fast. Water gets trapped under the bark. Then winter comes, and it cracks from the pressure." He glanced at her. "You saying we're growing too fast?" "No. I'm saying we keep the pressure low." He laughed under his breath, and she smiled without looking at him. By the time they returned, the sun was low enough to cast gold through the frost-laced branches. Naomi peeled off her gloves and lit the lantern while Morgan stacked the logs inside the lean-to they still used for drying. That evening, she pulled a folded cloth from the bottom of her trunk. She unwrapped it on the table: charcoal stubs, a softwood board, a scrap of muslin stretched taut across a frame. Morgan leaned in. "You planning to draw again?" "I'm going to remember things the way they looked, not the way they felt." He sat back. "That's a hard line to walk." She dipped the charcoal and made her first mark. "I don't mind hard." He watched her sketch the ridge outside, just the slope of it, the way it dipped before the trees thickened. "You ever show anyone your drawings?" he asked. "No, why me?" She didn't look up. "Because you don't ask to keep them." He nodded once, quiet. 2 nights later, they heard a knock. 3 sharp raps, then nothing. Morgan stood first. Naomi was already beside him, rifle in hand. He opened the door slow, one hand resting on the latch. A boy stood there, maybe 15, wrapped in a threadbare coat. His cheeks were windburned, his boots worn through. "Name's Eli," he said, voice cracking from cold. "Mr. Rourke sent me. Said you knew the land out here." Morgan's brow creased. "Rourke's a week south." "I know. He's building a bridge, and one of the mules went lame. Said if you had a team, he'd trade lumber for a loan." Morgan glanced at Naomi. She nodded once. "We've got a team." They gave the boy stew and a place near the fire. He didn't say much, just ate like he hadn't in days and curled up without complaint. Naomi handed him her extra quilt and knelt to check his boots. "Where's your family?" she asked gently. "Died in Kansas last spring. Fever." She didn't press. She just nodded and stood. The next morning, Morgan hitched the team and packed a sack of dried meat. Naomi stood at his side, arms crossed against the wind. "You trust him?" she asked, her voice low. "Rourke's honest. If he needs help, it's real." She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the boy. Morgan touched her back. "I'll be gone 4 days. 5 if the mule's worse than he says. I'll keep the traps and the fire." He leaned in, kissed her temple. "You keep yourself." She didn't answer. Just kissed him once, sure and certain. He rode out with the boy before midday, and the wind carried their tracks until they vanished behind the ridge. Naomi spent the first day checking fence lines and boiling down marrow for grease. That night, she drew by lantern light, sketching the boy's face, the slant of his shoulders, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers. On the 3rd morning, hoofs sounded before the sun cleared the tree line. She stepped outside, rifle at her side. It was Morgan. He was limping slightly, the horse lathered, but he was upright. She ran to him without a word. He slid down, caught her around the waist. 3 riders followed us, he said into her shoulder. But we shook them at the creek. Rourke's safe. Eli stayed behind to help. She stepped back, her hands on his arms. You hurt? No. He looked her over. You all right? I am now. They went inside. He poured coffee while she set bread to warm. They were looking for you, he said after a silence. One of them asked if I'd seen a girl with eyes like polished shale. Naomi stilled. That's what Cook used to say. Morgan's jaw tightened. Then they're not bounty men, she said. They're his. He nodded once. She sat, her face unreadable. Then we finish this. He poured her a cup. We don't run. No, she said. We make them regret coming. Morgan slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It held a name and a location scrawled in a hand that was not his. Rourke's man recognized one of them. Said he's hiding out near the old mine west of the coulee. She stared at the page, then at him. You think he's leading them? I think if we stop him, the rest scatter. Naomi folded the paper neatly, tucked it into her coat. I'll ride with you, she said. Morgan didn't argue. They left before dawn the next day, rifles strapped, eyes forward. Neither of them belonged to fear anymore. They belonged to each other. They followed the trail west, where the land turned harsh with stone and wind, and the sky pressed closer to the earth. Naomi rode ahead, eyes tracking the ground. Morgan kept to her side, rifle laid across his saddle, his expression unreadable. They spoke little, their silence wasn't heavy, just practiced. They'd learned when words served and when breath was better spent on watching. By the second day, they reached the rim of the coulee. The mine sat tucked behind a bluff, half buried by shale and brush. A single lean-to stood near the entrance, patched with scrap tin and old canvas. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked stovepipe. Naomi dismounted first, tying her mare to a scrub pine. Morgan followed, drawing his revolver but keeping it low. She pointed toward the slope. We'll come from above. They climbed without sound, boots finding grip in frost-hardened earth. From the ridge, they crouched behind a cluster of stone. A man stepped from the lean-to, tall, wrapped in a buffalo hide coat, his face clean-shaven, too clean for this country. Naomi whispered, That's him. Morgan nodded. How do you want to do this? We don't warn him. He didn't argue. They waited until the man turned his back to fetch wood from a pile near the mine's entrance. Naomi rose first, moving down the slope with the wind at her back. Morgan stayed a breath behind her. The man didn't hear them until Naomi's rifle clicked. He froze, hands half lifted. No one sent us, she said. We came for ourselves. He turned slowly. Naomi Dillard. His voice held recognition, not surprise. Didn't think you'd crawl out of that box. She didn't blink. Who else is left? He glanced toward the mine. Just me now. Morgan stepped closer. Then it ends here. The man's mouth twisted. You think killing me fixes it? Naomi lowered the rifle just enough to look him in the eye. No. But it stops more girls from being stolen. He took a half step back. I didn't take them. You handed them over, she said. And you watched. He didn't deny it. Morgan raised his revolver. We don't need your confession. Just your silence. The man lunged not for a weapon, but for the mine's entrance. Naomi shot first. The round caught him in the side, and he fell hard against the rocks. Morgan moved to check his pulse. Nothing. He looked up at her. It's done. She nodded, but her hands stayed clenched. He was the last. They buried him behind the mine. Not for mercy, just to keep the coyotes out of the hills. Morgan found a ledger inside the lean-to, wrapped in oilskin. Names, dates, places. He handed it to Naomi without speaking. She tucked it into her saddlebag. I'll send it to my uncle. He'll know what to do. They rode home slow, the urgency gone, but something else moving between them, something settled. On the third morning, the cabin came into view through the thinning trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the corral stood untouched. A hawk wheeled low across the pasture, and Naomi let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Inside, she stoked the fire while Morgan unpacked the saddlebags. When he set the ledger down, she turned to him. Do you ever wonder why we lived through all of it? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, so we could stop it from happening again. She stepped closer. And after that? His hand brushed her hip. So we could stay. She tilted her face up. Is that what you want, Morgan? He touched her cheek, rough fingers soft with care. I want what we've built. And I want you in it. Her eyes didn't leave his. I want to marry you. He blinked, then laughed once, low in his chest. You sure about that? Yes, she said. I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her then, slow and steady, the kind that wrapped around something deeper than relief. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Then we'll do it right, he said. Here. With the river as witness. They married 3 days later under the bare branches near the spring. Morgan carved rings from a strip of antler, and Naomi wore a dress she'd sewn from flour sack cotton, dyed with crushed walnut shell. Rourke came with Eli and 2 others from the bridge crew. They brought a hem wrapped in burlap and a bottle of rye. There was no preacher, but Morgan read from a worn copy of the Psalms, and Naomi answered with her mother's words in Chiricahua. No one asked what they meant. Everyone knew they were a vow. Winter settled hard that year, but the cabin held. Naomi planted her seeds in jars along the windowsill, and Morgan built a cradle from pine left over from the barn siding, just in case. They didn't talk about children yet, but they didn't need to. Spring would come, and with it, the garden. They'd fence more pasture, trade for chickens, maybe even build a smokehouse. Sometimes, at dusk, Naomi would sit on the porch and draw the hills. Morgan would join her, his hand resting against her knee, and they'd watch the sky turn gold over the ridge they had come down together. The land wasn't easy, but it was patient. So were they. And when the wind moved through the trees, it sounded like a promise kept.